Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is lesson 39 of the B2 course. So, this is a vocabulary lesson, and in today's session, we are going to be talking about the news. So, a big topic, lots to do in the session today. My name's Stephanie, this is level B2 or upper intermediate, and this will form lesson 39 of the overall course. So let's have a look in a bit more detail what we're going to cover in this session. So in lesson 39, you will improve your ability to understand news headlines. Now, news headlines can be notoriously difficult to interpret and understand, but we'll have a look at some strategies to overcome this. We'll look at some commonly used nouns and verbs that often appear in headlines, and we'll consider what they mean, and there'll be lots of practice opportunities as well. And because this topic of the news is very popular with examiners, we are also going to have a look at some typical exam style questions. Lots to do in the session today. Let's get started. So to begin with, we're going to have a look at some discussion questions. Now, at upper intermediate B2 level, you not only need to be able to say you agree or disagree, but you need to be able to develop your answers. You need to be able to give reasons and examples as to why you think something is a good idea or why something applies to you or not. So when we have a look at these discussion questions, I want you to think of your answers, but I want you to think of your reasons. And can you give any examples? Okay. Number 1, do you keep up to date with the news? If so, why do you think this is important? And if you don't, why not? Number 2, if you do keep up to date with the news, how do you follow it? Do you prefer a more traditional newspaper, or do you perhaps get updates on your smartphone, or do you watch maybe a news channel on the TV? Number 3, do you watch the news in English? Now, this is a very good way of improving your listening skills because more often than not, you will already know of the news story in your own language, so you will be able to predict what vocabulary is likely to come up. Also, often with news broadcasts, the pronunciation is very clear, which makes it easier to understand. So very good listening practice. Another reason why it's good is because it's quite short. So you can find quite short news bulletins, which means you don't have to concentrate for too long, but you can also fit it into a busy life, a busy work schedule. Number 4, do you have a favourite newspaper or news channel? And if so, why? Why do you like it? Perhaps you have a presenter that you think is particularly effective, or maybe the newspaper you like the type of stories that they report on. And number 5, do you think the news in your country is unbiased? Now, this is a very important point because obviously to trust and to believe the news, it needs to be unbiased. What do I mean by unbiased? Well, if something's biased, it means there's a preference one way or the other. So, for example, if a newspaper prefers a particular political party, we can say they are biased towards that party. And this can be a negative thing because it's likely to influence, firstly, the news they report, and secondly, how they report it. So that was question number 5. What about in your country? Do you think it's unbiased or do you think it's biased? So lots of big questions there. And remember, I'm asking you to be able to develop your answers, to give me reasons and perhaps some examples as well. Okay, good. hopefully you have some ideas there. Let's move on to the next slide. Again, I'm asking, what do you think? I have 3 topical areas connected to the news, and I'm asking for your opinion. Number 1, the newspaper will soon be dead and everyone will access the news online. What do you think? Is this likely to happen? Number 2, it is acceptable for journalists to tap politicians' phones and hack their email accounts. Again, what do you think and why? And number 3, celebrities must accept that their private lives will be in the public arena, and therefore newspapers and news channels will report on what they're doing. What do you think? Is this acceptable or not? So again, lots of topics that come up from the topic of the news. Important to think about what you think, but to develop your answers. Okay, well, let's move on to some vocabulary connected to headlines. Now, news headlines use dynamic language because they want to make a big impact. So words are usually short and emotive. And we're going to have a look at some examples of commonly found words. And I'm going to ask you, what do they mean? Now, as always, when we meet new vocabulary, it's very important to do so in the context so you can see how it's used. So we'll start with having a look at 7 headlines. And my question is, what do you think each story is going to be about? Number 1, police probe into smuggling ring. Number 2, blaze in office block. Number 3, mother's plea to kidnappers. Number 4, new bid to host Olympics. Number 5, clash of rival fans. Number 6, opinion poll predicts win. And number 7, threat of snow next week. So it's a good idea here to pause the slide and see if you can understand what you think each story will be about. As always, if there's vocabulary that you're not sure about, it's a really good idea to look it up. By looking up a word, you're more likely to remember it as well. So let's pause the slide and see if you can tell me what you think each headline will be about. Okay, so you will have noticed that in each headline I have highlighted the noun in green. Now, these nouns are very common words in newspaper headlines, and to help you, we're going to have a look at some synonyms. So on the left, we have the words taken from the headlines: a probe, a blaze, a plea, a bid, a clash, a poll, and a threat. And on the other side, I have a list of synonyms, words with a similar meaning: a risk, a request, a fire, an investigation, an attempt, a dispute, and a survey. But be careful, they are not matched correctly. So what you need to do is to choose the word on the left and try to match to a word with a similar meaning. And when you're doing this, it's a good idea to refer back to the previous slide. So let's look at the first one together. So, a probe. Remember the example sentence: police probe into smuggling ring. Now, what do you think a probe means? A risk, a request, a fire, an investigation, an attempt, a dispute, or a survey? Pause the slide and try this exercise with the other 7. Okay, how did you do? Well, let's check our answers together. So a probe is an investigation. A blaze is a fire. A plea is a request. A bid is an attempt. A clash is a dispute. A poll is a survey. And a threat is a risk. Now, hopefully you'll notice that these words are more dramatic. For example, saying a blaze instead of a fire is a much more dramatic word. The words on the right are much more neutral. Investigation, fire, request. These are not so emotive. For example, a plea is much more emotive language than a request. You'll also see that often the words on the left tend to be a lot shorter. So in a newspaper headline, there's less space. So instead of an investigation, it's shortened a probe. It's a much shorter word to use. So well done if you got those correct. And as always, it's now time to practice. So using those 7 nouns, can you complete these headlines? Number 1, for more funding from charities. Number 2, breaks out on ship. Number 3, government reveals lead. Number 4, oil slick poses a to wildlife. Number 5, teenager in to cross Atlantic. Number 6, of union members overpay. And number 7, council into illegal parking. Pause the slide and see if you can complete with the missing noun. My tip to you would be do the ones you can first. So instead of looking at number 1 and thinking that's very difficult, I don't know, choose a noun that you feel comfortable you can put in the right place, and then by elimination, you'll see what's left. Okay, let's check our answers. So, number 1, plea for more funding from charities, request. Number 2, blaze or fire breaks out on ship. Government poll, survey, reveals lead. Oil slick poses a threat, a risk to wildlife. Number 5, teenager in bid to cross Atlantic, attempt. Number 6, clash of union members over pay, dispute. And number 7, council probe into illegal parking. Remember, probe means investigation. Really well done if you got those correct. It's not easy. I know it's not easy. But remember, if you're reading the news in English, it's a language that's intended for native speakers, and often they play with the language as well, as I'm sure they do in your country. So it can be very challenging. Okay, so we had a look at nouns. Let's move on and do the same exercise, but this time we're going to look at 7 verbs. So again, I have 7 headlines. What do you think these headlines will be about? Number 1, economy boosted by trade deal. Number 2, film stars to wed. Number 3, judge backs safer driving campaign. Number 4, schools ban fizzy drinks. Number 5, media expose fraud. Number 6, extra buses axed. And number 7, locals vow to fight back. So as we did with the previous slide, it's a good idea to pause here, check any vocabulary you're not sure about, and see if you have an idea, what do you think these headlines are going to be about? Okay, so it's time for me to give you a little bit of help. As before, I've highlighted this time the verbs in green, and I will give you a list of synonyms. So to boost, to wed, to back, to ban, to expose, to axe, and to vow, these were the verbs we saw in the headlines. On the right, we have some synonyms: to cut, to support, to promise, to improve, to marry, to forbid, and to reveal. So see if you can match the verb with the synonym. Again, it's a good idea to go back and have a look at the word in context. So pause the slide and have a go. Okay, let's check through our answers together. So to boost means to improve. To wed is to marry. To back means to support. To ban is to forbid. To expose is to reveal. To axe is to cut. And to vow is to promise. So you can see again here, the words on the left tend to be a lot shorter and are more dramatic. So it's time to practice. I'm going to give you 7 new headlines and 7 verbs that are missing. You need to complete the sentences with the missing verbs. Okay, number 1, media spending cuts. Number 2, prince to childhood sweetheart. Number 3, celebrities, new privacy laws. Number 4, economy by tourists. Number 5, Prime Minister to fight terror. Number 6, firm, 1,000 jobs. And number 7, airlines to carry on luggage. Pause the slide and see if you can correctly put in our 7 verbs into these spaces. Okay, it's time to check our answers. Let's see how you did. So number 1, media expose, reveal, spending cuts. Number 2, prince to wed childhood sweetheart, to marry. Number 3, celebrities back new privacy laws, support. Number 4, economy boosted by tourists, improved. Number 5, Prime Minister vows to fight terror, promises. Number 6, firm axes 1,000 jobs, firm cuts. And number 7, airlines to ban carry on luggage, to forbid. Really, really well done if you got those correct. As I said, it's not easy, but these words are very, very commonly found in headlines. So understanding them will help you out. But as always, it's about practice. The more you practice, the more news you read, the more news you watch, the more used to the type of language you will be. Okay, so let's move on to the final part of our lesson today, and we're talking about current affairs. What do I mean by current affairs? So current affairs means the news. It describes events of political or social interest and importance happening in the world at the present time. So why is it important to be able to talk about the news or current affairs? Well, I think it's important for lots of reasons. It helps to break the ice if you're socializing in English. It's a useful topic of conversation. Maybe you're meeting new people in a business context. It's a way of making conversation. And also because it's a very, very popular topic in exams such as IELTS. So very important to be able to talk about current affairs, what's happening in your region, and also in the world as a whole. Let's have a look then at some typical IELTS style questions. As we look through these, imagine what your answers would be. And remember, it's always a good idea to develop your answer, give extra information, and try to give an example. Number 1, how often do you read a newspaper? Number 2, why do you think some people like reading newspapers? Number 3, which other sources can people use to find out about the latest news? And number 4, do you think that it's important to know about news from other countries? Why or why not? Now, I think one of the important things to note here is that there's no right or wrong answer. There's no correct answer. What an examiner is looking for is the accuracy, the vocabulary, and how you develop your answer. So it doesn't matter whether you agree with the statement or not, you're going to be marked on the language you use. So the more you've got to say about it, the more you can show off your English ability. So have a think what your answers would be to these 4 questions. Okay, and our final slide, again, more exam practice. This time, you need to describe an interesting news story that you have recently read about. You should say, firstly, what the story was. Secondly, who was involved in the story. Thirdly, where you read or heard about the story. And finally, you need to explain why this story was interesting to you. Now, I've chosen this question to focus on because it shows how it's so important to be prepared for exams. When you're feeling nervous, it can be very difficult to suddenly think of an interesting news story to talk about, even for a native speaker. You're nervous, you're stressed, so your mind's not thinking clearly. That's why you need to think of an example before the exam. So you need to practice with your example, you need to practice saying it aloud, and you need to practice the different stages of your answer to make sure you cover the 4 points listed on the card. And that brings us to the end of lesson 39. I hope you found it useful. Lesson 40 is a course review lesson. You remember lesson 20 was also a course review where we looked at the first 20 lessons. Lesson 40 is going to be reviewing lessons 21 through to 39. So a really crucial lesson if you have been following the course. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you next time for lesson 40. Thank you so much for watching.